Of this webinar series, Sickle Cell Disease and Gene Therapies, Trust, Clinical Trials, and Transformative Therapies, Ethical Pathways in Gene Therapy. My name is Jonathan Green, and I'm Director of the Office of Human Subjects Research Protections here at the NIH. I'm also a practicing and pulmonary and critical care physician. As this webinar is being held in recognition of Sickle Cell Awareness Month, I wanted to just speak for a moment about my own awareness of sickle cell disease. My first exposure to patients with sickle cell came as a medical student and resident working in the inner city hospitals of Detroit Receiving Hospital and Boston City Hospital, taking care of patients in acute sickle crisis. As an intensive care physician, I've cared for sickle cell patients my entire career. What I'm most aware of is both how much and how little has changed in the treatment and caring for individuals with sickle cell. On the one hand, we have the potentially curative therapies of stem cell transplantation and gene editing, but on the other hand, life expectancy remains markedly reduced. Most patients with sickle cell disease have no access to these new therapies and are still seen in our emergency rooms in crisis, often labeled as drug-seeking, and are treated no differently than when I was an intern almost 40 years ago. In today's webinar, we will hear from people with firsthand knowledge of sickle cell disease as the parent of a child with sickle cell, from physician investigators who have dedicated their careers to caring for patients with sickle cell and finding new treatments, and to members of the regulatory community responsible for reviewing proposed new therapies. I'm sure you will find today's webinar exciting and informative. I know that I will. At this point, to kick things off, I have the distinct privilege of introducing Captain David Wong to provide opening remarks. Dr. Wong, or Captain Wong, is the Senior Advisor to the Director at the Office of Human Research Protections. David?
Thank you, Dr. Green, for the introduction. It's my honor to be here today to express my sincere commitment on behalf of HHS to improving the lives of individuals with sickle cell disease and their families. For far too long, the sickle cell community has not received the full attention and support that it needs and deserves. I saw this firsthand when I led the sickle cell disease portfolio during both the first Trump administration and during the Biden administration. Some of the notable achievements during that time included having the first National Academy's Sickle Cell Disease Consensus Report, Strategic Plan, and Blueprint. We established the Sickle Cell Disease Federal Agency Work Group, comprising of over 60 members from 11 different HHS agencies. We hosted a Sickle Cell Roundtable with First Lady Melania Trump. And last year, we had the very first HHS Summit for Sickle Cell Disease during Awareness Month. HHS across the many agencies continues to support sickle cell in so many ways, and I'm so proud of this work. To share just a few highlights, the Health Resources and Services Administration, through their Sickle Cell Disease Treatment Demonstration Program and Newborn Screening Follow-up Program, supports comprehensive sickle cell disease care systems, which serve 25,000 people with sickle cell disease between 2017 and 2021. The National Institutes of Health continues to fund and support groundbreaking basic science research, clinical trials, and the Cure Sickle Cell Initiative. As a result of NIH's funded research and relevant to today's discussion, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, in December 2023, approved 2 milestone gene therapies for treating individuals with sickle cell disease 12 years and older. One of these therapies is the first FDA-approved treatment to utilize a type of novel genome editing technology called CRISPR, signaling an innovative scientific and medical advancement. Today's webinar is part 1 of a 2-part series on sickle cell disease and gene therapies, and is led by my office, the HHS Office for Human Research Protections. OHRP is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year and is responsible for providing leadership in the protection of the rights, welfare, and well-being of human subjects involved in research conducted or supported by HHS. Using the recently approved gene therapies as a case study, today's session promises a rich, open, and insightful dialogue on ethical considerations and establishing trustworthiness in sickle cell disease research. Thank you all for attending today's event. Without further ado, I will now hand the mic back to Dr. Green. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Captain Wong. We can just advance to the next slide. I'm just going to run through a few housekeeping items. So please, so we have two talks today. First will be by Mr. Antoine Sarton, who is a parent and caregiver, the perspective on gene therapy, followed by Dr. Willie Smith, who's going to talk on responsibilities for the ethical conduct of sickle cell disease research. That will be followed by a panel discussion, an audience Q&A, and closing remarks. Please submit your questions and comments using the Q&A box in the webinar, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can. We will share the slides with all attendees afterwards, and this event is being recorded and will be archived in 1 to 2 weeks on the sickle cell disease playlist on the HHS YouTube site. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Antoine Sarton. Mr. Sarton is a sickle cell disease advocate from Louisville, Kentucky. His 12-year-old daughter, Kaylee, has sickle cell disease and was recently approved to receive gene therapy treatment. Antoine has graciously offered to share his family story and journey and set the stage for today's conversation. Without further ado, over to you, Antoine.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to say thank you, Mr. David Wong, for having me, allowing me to share my journey with the sickle cell, also to OHRP. Again, I just would like to say thank you all for just allowing me this platform to discuss and share what it's like to be a parent as a caregiver, taking care of a child with sickle cell disease. Again, my name is Antoine Sarton. I am from Louisville, Kentucky, born and raised. I'm very familiar hands-on with sickle cell. Growing up, my mother always installed in me about making sure that I knew my blood type. Growing up, I watched my grandmother in and out of the hospital taking care of my auntie and my uncle, who both had sickle cell disease, SS. My uncle was the youngest, but my auntie was the youngest of the girls. There was 5 of them. And so, again, I watched my grandmother literally live in and out of the hospital along with my mother, going back and forth. And so as a child at that age, I didn't really take it that serious because I always saw them come back home. You know, I see them go in the hospital, I see them come back home. And I just thought, you know, they were just sick. But as time went on, my mother was always telling me how sick they really were. And there was times that they almost didn't get to come home. And so she just always installed in me to know my blood type and that I need to know that I carry the trait of sickle cell. And again, at a young age as a kid, I'm not thinking nothing much of it. I'm like, you know, just living a life as a little boy, a teenage boy, trying to find my own identity growing up. But I fast forward that 2008, my mother lost her sister, went into a crisis, ended up having a brain aneurysm, and died November of 2008. So that was the first strike. Fast forward, it hit home for me. And again, I've always had that conversation as I was growing up, you know, discussing, you know, do you know your blood type? Do you carry the sickle cell trait? I have 2 kids. My son is 18, but unfortunately, he doesn't have the trait at all. But my daughter, on the other hand, when it hit home, the year of 2013, I didn't have that discussion. And I was very disappointed in myself during that time because I assumed because her mother is biracial, that she would not be carrying she wouldn't carry the trait. And so that it's not true. Um, Fortunately, she actually did carry the trait, which is why our daughter has sickle cell SS. And in order to have the disease, each parent has to carry the trait, which I have the S and her mother had the S, which made her have the SS, which is the severest one out of the disease. And so um, it hit home February 2013. We got that phone call, had to go and get take our daughter to get a go see a blood specialist to confirm it. And that's where we met Callie's doctor today, Dr. Raj. He's been in her life since birth. Um, we have completely followed all the steps in as far as trying to do what's best for her and her health and trying to give her the best opportunity in life. There's been some challenges within the last 5 to 6 years with our daughter. I noticed a decline in her health. She started off really good. You know, we would go do our 3-month checkups, getting the labs, getting CBC counts. I made sure that we did our annual cranial Doppler scan each and every year. Um, any medications that they suggest, which, you know, when you first start out, for those who don't know, when you first start out, they put you on penicillin to help fight off any type of bacterial infections for the first 5 years. And then after that, I believe we got on hydroxyurea at the age of 4, when she was about 4 or 5 years old. Whenever the FDA approved it from from a pill form to a liquid form, um, we jumped right on it just because her doctor thought it would help us, which it did. Actually, it decreases her chances of having crisis, because the first 6 years of her life, she may have only had maybe one to two crises, and we might have went to the ER maybe a handful of times, but we didn't see a lot of crisis in her, sickle cell crisis in her, until when she was about uh, 6 and 7, kind of when I started to notice a turn in her. Um, Her spleen was enlarging, and again, we kept an eye on it. We kept trying to. There was times where we was trying to get it scheduled to get it out, but unfortunately, she had so many crises during those times. A lot of the times, the anesthesia doctors and surgeon doctors, did not want to put her under anesthesia to to remove the spleen. So we ended up kind of just delaying it, because one of the doctors thought maybe it would default, was what they call it, or shrink smaller. But in reality, really, it never did. It just got worse. And so just within last year was one of the worst years that I've experienced taking care of our daughter, Callie, with sickle cell. Finally, her doctor realized that she was receiving a lot of blood transfusions, and every time that she would get the blood transfusions, she hemoglobin would jump back up. Now, granted, her base rate hemoglobin was like hangs around between a 7 and 8 during that time. And you know, for sickle cell, a 8 to 9 is really good for them. The average humans, we average between 12 to 15, I believe. But for sickle cell patients, it anywhere from between 8 and 9 is pretty good for them. Where she was hanging around a 7, and she would end up getting blood transfusions to help with her hemoglobin, because her hemoglobin would drop sometimes down to like a 6, maybe below 5. And so she would get a blood transfusion. Um, during that time, again, we was in and out of the hospital, receiving a lot of blood transfusions. She was having a lot of pain crisis, and every time that she develops a pain crisis, she goes into an acute chest syndrome. Um, and that has been it's been really tough on us, really, really tough to see her go through those pain crises and have to see her suffer like that. Fast forward, just last year, a doctor called and told us that we need to be admitted into the hospital because she she has developed an autoimmune disorder called hemolytic anemia. So for those that don't know that, that's basically her body was overproducing a lot of producing a lot of more antibodies than what she should, which were attacking the healthy red blood cells, not realizing those are healthy red blood cells. So every time she was getting the blood transfusions, that was the reason why her hemoglobin would end up dropping right back down and eating away. The antibodies was eating away with the red blood cells. So we ended up in the hospital. I'll never forget, it was July the 4th of 2024. And we was in the hospital for 32 days. Her hemoglobin ended up dropping down more to like a 4. They had to run call rapid. We ended up in the ICU for a whole week. That was a point where I thought I was going to lose her. Again, I go back to watching my auntie and my uncle, and I just remember those days when they was going in and out of the hospital, in and out of the hospital, in and out of the hospital. 1 minute they'd be sick as like no other, and then they'd be right back like nothing really happened. And to know that I wasn't for sure if we was going to bring our daughter home this time took a lot. It took a lot. It hit the core really, really tough for me. Her doctors, the nurses. We worked around the clock to try to figure out what was the best treatment for her. And again, I give all praises to the higher power because it was nothing but my faith and my prayers and from my families and friends. But her doctor, Dr. Raj, um, which is an amazing, amazing doctor. He worked around the clock. He contacted a lot of different doctors in his field, people that he's colleagues that he's known for years. He's actually shared her a story with them, and they came up with a solution for her. I had to go back to this medicine called Solaris. Is what saved my daughter's life. Um, that right there was a big ordeal. And again, I'm learning as I go. Never heard of a hemolytic anemia. Never heard of Solaris. Never heard of. She was on the steroids to try to help decrease the antibodies, but during those antibodies, anytime you're on the steroids, a lot of times you go into a crisis, and so that's what threw her into the crisis or whatsoever. And her doctor pulled me to the side and asked me and talked to me about thinking about long term and what's best for her long term. And this is how we came up with this is how I learned about the gene therapy. Now we tried to look into the bone marrow transplant, but the bone marrow transplant, there was no match. And again, you don't have a lot of matches in the database, but people don't really offer to donate a bone marrow, from my understanding of it. And so the gene therapy is where we lean to, and I kind of did some research. We ended up at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, one of the doctors that he knew of and referred us to. And we had a couple consultations with the transplant doctor and the hematology doctor up there as well. And Callie was a fit for it, but she couldn't get it till she turned 12. And so FDA has not approved it just yet for children under the age of 12. So once you turned 12, we had to go hoop through a lot of hurdles that we had to go through with trying to get approved. Um, Most insurance, which we are on Medicaid, they're not just going to fork out $2.63 million for a drug treatment. They had to see it. They had to talk to a lot her doctors, even the doctors up in Cincinnati. A lot of medical documentations had to be submitted. She had to take, I mean, I've never seen that much blood testing be done just for the insurance to even consider of approval. And um, through the grace of God, April of this year, we got approved for the gene therapy. Now, um, with the gene therapy, um, during that process, she ended up having a hip replacement because she developed avascular neurosis, which we just got done back in July. And we we had to pause the gene therapy because of her being on hydroxyurea. Her labs have been looking really good here lately. And so we just chose to reevaluate this in the next 6 months. But what I will say is that I have built relationships with each and every one of these doctors, even with her primary hematology doctor. We have a close relationship. And, um, the unknowing of what you should do or what it's like is tough. But only thing I can say is um, educate yourself as much as you can. Build the relationships as much as you can with your doctors. Um, and I think for me personally, it's always been a vibe to connect with her doctors or anyone that I'm trying to learn as much information as I can. Has there been some hiccups and some disagreements? Yes, there have. I've had some plenty of disagreements with some of the doctors. But what I admire about her doctor is, and I'll say this and end it on this, he's not a doctor who thinks he knows it all, even though he's been doing it for almost 40 some years. He's a data man. He likes to collect a lot of data and he likes to get to sit down at the round table and collaborate with a lot of other doctors, not just locally, but around the world to see what their inputs is or what they think about, what's the best move for his patients. And so that right there means a lot to me um, when it comes to having a relationship with your doctor and living with sickle cell and just trying to navigate through this journey. Again, I stress enough, try to educate yourself as much as you can and keep your faith in it, in this journey. But I thank you all again for having me, allowing me to share this testimony. Again, it's been a journey for us and it's never ending journey. This thing is still going and I make a lot of sacrifices um, to make sure that my daughter has the best opportunity at life, like each and every one of us get when we get a chance to wake up the next day. Thank you all.
Thank you, Antoine, so much for sharing your story with us. I'm just struck again by um, how important it is to have somebody like you that can advocate um, for for our loved ones who need the care. So we're going to open it up to Q&A, and now we're waiting to see if there are any questions from the audience. I do have a question for you. I'm wondering if at any point during this journey you ever considered enrolling Kelly in a clinical trial, and if you had, what was your experience with that? And if you haven't, why not? Were they just not offered, or did you decide against going a clinical research route?
I've heard of some. I have not been presented directly, but I have heard of some. Um, to be honest, clinical trials To me, I have to receive a lot more information about it, a lot more education on it. I am a little nervous of just throwing my child into something just for a trial to see if it's going to work or if it's not going to work. And that's just me being, as a parent, as a caregiver,
Absolutely.
it's just being me being honest. But again, I also know that throughout this journey, and I'm also okay with understanding that, you know, if it don't help her, it can help someone else. And that's a tough pill to swallow, but um, I am very understanding of it and I understand how it works. But again, we haven't got to that point yet. And I thought really the gene therapy was going to be kind of like our little try, because this is the biggest step that we've ever had to take, was trying with something new outside of, taking medications daily. But again, I'm not against it. I just need to have a lot more information on any clinical trials that we decide to go try out.
Great. Thank you for that answer. I do also wondering, you shared some about the process you had to go through to get approved for the gene therapy, tons of testing, lots of blood work, all sorts of things. But really, what was kind of your thought process too, and how did you really weigh whether or not to move forward with this? And do you have any reservations at this point? I'm just interested in sort of hearing a little bit more about, from your perspective, how you make that decision for such a really a big step.
Yeah, I'll be the first to tell you this it's been hard, been very, very challenging, because ever since she was a child, I've always took her. She's always been to her doctors, and as she's gotten older, I've always allowed her to partake in her office visits. And so we went for our consultation for the gene therapy. And again, it was a lot of information to take in, a lot of stuff I didn't quite understand. But then as I kind of went and did my research, I started to understand and learn more about it. Um, the biggest challenge is, and for I can only speak from my situation, because my daughter, the first thing she heard was, or the only thing that she got out of that, was chemo and her losing her hair. But me trying to get her to understand that this can change your life for longevity. You can actually add more life to your life if we decide to go down this route. And so that's been the biggest challenge even to this day. The reason why there's a little relief now is because, I've talked with her, the doctors, and told her we were just going to put this on pause for about 6 months and reevaluate it, because of where her labs and how well she's doing on the hydroxyurea. Because if with the gene therapy, you have to come off the hydroxyurea for at least 2 months in order for them to collect the best stem cells from you, to send off. And in the midst of that, a lot of our doctors were worried about the prep that they would have to do, which means she would have to get blood transfusions, and now her getting the blood transfusion puts her at a higher risk of the hemolytic anemia flaring back up. And so that was one of the reasons why we kind of just put it on pause, because she's doing good right now. We haven't had a crisis in over a year. Um, but again, her doctor and I last year, when we talked about the gene therapy, we were thinking long term. And so, uh, to answer your question, the challenge of it is trying to get a 12-year-old to understand trying to see the future. And that's been my biggest challenge right now, mentally, with sickle cell, because with sickle cell, they get tired after a while. They get really tired. Um, and a lot of times they give up or want to give up. And so, as me as a parent, I'm trying to install in her and teach her and keep her strong minded, um, during this journey, because it's not going to be easy. But there are times that we can take advantage of the good things that are that can come about this. And again, from what I've learned and what I've seen, I do like what the gene therapy has to offer. It's just in our situation, getting her ready for the gene therapy, it does scare me.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to move us along. I apologize to those who put questions in the chat. We have not had a chance to get to them, but it is time to go to our next speaker. So at this point,
Okay.
I am really pleased to introduce Dr. Wally Smith, I apologize, who's nationally recognized expert in sickle cell disease and the inaugural holder of the Florence Neal Cooper Smith Professorship of Sickle Cell Disease at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine. Dr. Smith is also the Vice Chair for Research in the Division of General Internal Medicine and has been involved in several clinical trials involving investigational sickle cell therapies. Dr. Smith will be speaking today on responsibilities for the ethical conduct of sickle cell research. Thank you, Dr. Smith. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Antoine, for a passionate and very illustrative setup for what I'm going to talk about now, which will sound very objective and very dispassionate and very theoretical, but you gave it legs, and I appreciate that. And I may refer back to your plight, yours and your daughter's plight, in my talk. Next slide. My job is to talk about the responsibilities of individuals and institutions for safe and effective clinical research in sickle cell disease. So the institutional obligation, boy, these are going fast. Can you go back? The institutional obligation is to protect human subjects, whereas the individual's obligation is to balance risks and benefits, the way Antoine just got through talking about, when deciding on clinical trials or therapies in sickle cell disease. Next slide. So let's first talk about the institution's responsibility. Institutions could include, in this case, pharmaceutical companies, device manufacturers, and others. It could include universities, but anyone conducting research on human subjects has a primary responsibility first to do no harm, to protect human subjects, their rights, their welfare, and their safety. We have an obligation to do sound research, scientifically sound, based on reasonable and appropriate scientific hypotheses. We have a responsibility to minimize the risks to those who participate in the research as much as is possible. And then we have the obligation to convey to those who participate in this research exactly what their risks are and what their potential benefits are. We need to make it clear to them. We need to make it clear if we're a maker of a device or manufacturer, clear to the doctors and to the caregivers who will be conveying information to patients. Make it clear to them what we know about risks and benefits. So institutions and doctors and those doing research have a heavy responsibility when doing research. We often get somewhat jaded by having to do all of this because we think of it as an obligation without reward. But it actually does have a reward, and that reward is if anything goes wrong. If anything goes wrong, we will have at least done our job of explaining all of this to the patients ahead of time, and it will not be a surprise to us or to the patients. Next slide. Okay, so the big deal here is to talk about risks and benefits in a balanced way. And that's going to be the theme of everything I talk about, is balancing risks and benefits, all involved, including the patients and their families. Antoine, you and your daughter are balancing risks and benefits. Next. Let's talk about the risks in sickle cell disease. Can you go backward, please? These slides have a mind of their own, it seems. There's a little checkbox called use timings, and maybe it's checked, and maybe the thing is automatically advancing. If you uncheck that box on the slideshow controls, if you uncheck the use timings box, that may clear up the problem. I'd like to go 2 slides prior to this one, please. All right, I don't think the slides are going to cooperate very well. Let me just say that balancing risks and benefits means explaining, in sickle cell disease, explaining the risks of mortality due to the disease. And in adults, the mortality risks are pretty significant when compared to kids. We are now able to get children to the point where 95% of them live to adulthood. We do that with penicillin. We do that with the screening that Antoine talked about for stroke. And we transfuse patients who are at risk for stroke for life. And so we now are able to pretty much guarantee that all children with sickle cell disease, there's a 95% chance of their survival until adulthood. And the mortality rate for sickle cell disease for children is going down. That's not the same for adults. When you get to be 16, 17, 18, 19, the mortality rate is significantly increased. The organs begin to fail. The kidneys, the lungs, their heart problems begin to arise. Hip problems begin to arise. Eye and ear problems begin to arise. And so adults with sickle cell disease have a much different outcome, a much higher mortality risks than do children. And Antoine, your daughter, it appears, has begun to exhibit some of those mortality risks earlier than you perhaps had thought, even at the age of 12. This is just an individual thing, and we can't control it. Next slide. All right, looks like the slides are not going to advance. So what we have to do is explain when it comes to gene therapy and when it comes to the decision about whether to go for gene therapy or, for that matter, to go for something as simple as hydroxyurea, explain the risks and benefits. And you have been teased with a slide that had a lot of red and green on it. Let me tell you what that slide says. On the top left of that slide is a high risk, high benefit environment where a younger person, maybe even before the age of 12, a younger person has a lot of potential risks of death from the disease, organ failure from the disease, etc. And this is the slide, and should be willing, therefore, to tolerate a lot of risks from their therapy, i.e., be willing to undergo chemotherapy, be willing to risk death from the chemo itself, be willing to lose your hair, lose your sexual function in order to get a huge benefit. And what is that? Being spared from the pain of adulthood, the organ damage of adulthood, all of the downstream effects that are shown in the bottom right. On the other hand, a 60-year-old person who already perhaps has had a life of pain, already has damaged organs like their kidney, hip, etc., should not be willing to tolerate as much risk because there's not as much benefit to be had. And so this slide is trying to show the differences in risk tolerance that on average an individual should be willing to tolerate based on where they are in their lives. So Antoine, your daughter at age 12 with the replaced hip already and with all the other crises and all the other risks that she has been experiencing might be more willing to tolerate risks than somebody who's 50 or 60 years old and really not a whole lot more to save. And for them, we might use less risky treatments. We see this in the rules. The rules are you have to be at least 12, and the top age benefits. The top age varies by who you talk to. Is somewhere around 35 before you say, I maybe don't want to go through with the therapy. The cancer doctors actually talk about the biological age. That's to say, how many of your organs are still working versus not working. Or they even talk about your functional status, and they have several scales. One's called the Karnofsky scale. So they try to map people out on this little grid here. Your biological age, chronological age, how much organ failure you have already, and then even attitude. How much risk are you personally willing to take with given the amount of organ failure and how much the disease has affected you. So this is just one way of trying to lay out for Antoine and his daughter and people, doctors considering doing gene therapy or any other kind of transformative therapy, lay out where on the risk benefit plateau they may fit, and then help them with their decision making. Dare I say next slide? Let's see what happens. In order to get approval for human research, we have to lay these things out. We have to say in writing, go to the literature, write down the potential risks, write down who we will and will not accept into a research study. People with certain things will be excluded. People who have certain characteristics will be included because it makes them perhaps more likely to benefit from the therapy or to show a benefit if they are treated. We have to talk about the benefits to the participants, others. We have to talk about why the risks that we're going to put this person under are reasonable in relation to those benefits. And what will we be gain? Antoine said, my daughter may not benefit, but somebody else might. We have to talk about that. And why is that reasonable in relationship to the knowledge to be gained? This is what goes into a protocol when we want to get human research approved at an institution. Next. And so in general, in sickle cell disease, we talk about what's called remittive therapies. Transfusion, hydroxyurea, crizanlizumab, L-glutamine are the ones available now as lower risks than transplant and gene therapy, which are of more potential benefit. And so we talk about this in every patient who comes to our clinic gets this entire, you can imagine how long it takes to explain this entire page to somebody. It might take 2 visits to get through this entire page to explain to them what the possible risks and benefits are, what the possible therapies are, and help them arrive at a place of decision about what they are willing to try. Once again, if they're less than 12 years of age, they're not in my clinic. First of all, they're in the pediatric clinic. And so they wouldn't hear about this, the approved gene therapies, as a matter of daily practice. But even now, we're trying some of these therapies on clinical trials in younger patients. And then Antoine mentioned all of the approvals necessary, the insurance approval necessary, and all the other red tape that he's had to go through to get his daughter to the point. Our experience is that a good 50 to 75% of the people who walk in the door saying, I'm thinking about gene therapy or transplant therapy, never get to that point, Antoine. They never get to the point of going through the insurance approval because they either decide that the risks are not worth it, or something disqualifies them, or they hear enough and say, I don't want to, I'm not, I remove myself. I've decided I don't need to go any further. Next slide. So here are the current federal indications for gene therapy for sickle cell disease. Again, you have to be greater than 12 years of age. You have to show some evidence of risk. And these are the evidences that we have zoomed in on. Vaso-occlusive crises, splenic sequestration, as Antoine talked about, acute chest syndrome, as somebody else alluded to, priapism. Usually these have to happen more than once in a year's time. So the more often these things happen, the higher your potential risks. An interesting thought, though, is if you went back and looked at that slide that put people on the risk profile, the earlier and the less complications you have, the more at risk or the more potential at risk you might be. That's a different way of thinking about it. So some pediatricians might say a 6-year-old who has their first stroke but has never experienced any of the things on the right-hand side of this screen, you might want to take them immediately and get them transformative therapy. Why? Because they have so much at stake, so much of their body to lose at risk. And you don't want to wait until all of that happens. So these are ethical dilemmas that we're going through right now. I think my time may be up. Do I have another slide? I think my time may be up. This is about corruption. Beware when people start selling you. That's a bad sign. And they should be conferring with you, and you should have a voice in what happens to you. There's rules in place to stop healthcare corruption, but um, people people are often wrongly enthusiastic in the sense that they are, wanting to get enough research subjects in their trials, et cetera, and may not completely lay out the benefits and risks the way I just talked about. So um, take a person with you, and listen carefully, and um, do not accept an opinion without doing, as Antoine said, doing your research. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Smith, for that presentation. We have just a little bit of time for questions, and I'm going to exert again my moderator privilege here and ask you the one question here. So one of the themes of this webinar, of course, is trust. And I wonder if you could speak for a moment about how you approach that. I mean, sickle cell is, of course, a disease that in the U.S. is virtually exclusively in the African American community. And particularly when enrolling people in clinical trials for sickle cell. I mean, how do you build the trust given some of the historical ethical transgressions and some of the problems even just in accessing healthcare? And is that sort of explicit or implicit in your discussions? And I just wonder if you could maybe spend a moment talking about that.
Oh no, it's explicit, Jonathan. I refer to Tuskegee. I refer to slavery. I refer to the bum rap that African Americans have received in the United States, and refer to the fact that the healthcare system was built for the rich and not for the poor. I refer explicitly to the mistrust, earned mistrust that comes from having your pain ignored, often in emergency departments and hospitals. I get all that on the table because if I don't, I'm not going to be trusted. Now, that's not enough to earn me trust. I then have to earn the trust of the individual that I'm taking care of. So the next thing I do is talk about their felt need. What's their felt need? Usually it's pain. So I have to deal with their pain, talk about how we're going to manage their pain. And managing pain well earns trust. So I definitely am a pain doctor. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing. But then I try at that point to say, there could be a better life for you. You might want to think about how to permanently get out of this pain or at least lower it significantly. Would you like to hear about 7 or 8 ways that we could do that other than opioids, which I've been giving you for quite some time? And sometimes I hear, no, I'm happy just like I am. I have to put up with that. I have to say to them, I'm still your friend. I'm still your doctor. I'm not going anywhere. But if they say yes, then I go into that long explanation with all those therapies I told you about. And we start walking down the road of maybe you'd like to be on hydroxyurea. Maybe you'd like to be on gene therapy. Maybe you'd like to get a transplant.
Thank you so much for that answer. We are going to move along now to the next phase of this webinar. We now are going to have a panel discussion. We can switch the slides over. So we have 2 new voices and perspectives to bring to the table here. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Krishnamurti, who's professor of pediatrics and chief of the section of pediatric hematology, oncology, and bone marrow transplant at the Yale School of Medicine. Dr. Krishnamurti specializes in transformative therapies, including bone marrow transplants and gene therapies. Also joining us a little bit later on in the discussion, we have Dr. Megha Kaushal, a pediatric hematologist oncologist and branch chief in the Office of Therapeutic Products at the Centers for Biologics Evaluation and Research, or CBER, at FDA. Dr. Kaushal supports clinical review and regulatory oversight of gene therapies and will join us, as I said, a little bit later. Okay, so the first topic follows on really from the question I just had, is about building trust in gene therapies and research. And our first question is for Dr. Krishnamurti. As a provider, can you describe some of your experiences helping patients and families understand gene therapies, how you help them weigh the risks and benefits, and what do you see as the most important factors in fostering trust? Dr. Krishnamurti, and please feel free to introduce yourself too.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm a pediatric hematologist by training, and for the last over 3 decades, my work has spanned sickle cell disease, curative therapies, and really many different aspects of sickle cell disease. You asked a question about some experience in helping patients and families understand gene therapies. The first thing that I'm struck by is how few people ever get to hear that gene therapy or transformative therapy is even an option. Antoine, not everybody is fortunate as you to be receiving care in a major academic center with a caring doctor like Dr. Ashok Raj, whom you mentioned multiple times. Most of the patients, adult patients, get their treatment through a string of emergency departments where nobody knows to tell them this. Second, as you mentioned, Antoine, and as you did, Wally, as well, is so many patients have arrived at a toxic equilibrium with their disease and can't see a way out, can't imagine another alternative reality. So they never seek care. So after they come for an appointment, they have received no information whatsoever from where they came. A typical meeting is 2 to 3 hours. And while shared decision making typically has a 3 meeting, the team meeting, the option meeting, and the decision meeting, typically I won't sign anybody up for treatment without at least 4 meetings. It's a fire hose of information that the families have to deal with. And so the first time they meet, they're like, this is just way too much information. We didn't know that we need to know so much to understand what it is that you're talking about. And this is after having had hundreds of such conversations. And after that, many people are just not in a position in their lives. Too many are not making rent. Too many have destroyed family lives. They cannot even wrap their head around this decision. As much as we tell people that they have to make an informed decision, you assume that they're able to make an informed decision. But for too many, it's not a reality. So it's a fascinating conversation. It's one conversation that I would recommend for everybody. Doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are or how severe it is. You ought to be sitting down with a doctor that knows about gene therapy and just have a conversation. I tell patients at the end of the conversation, you have 3 options. You could tell me, thank you, but no thank you. Thank you, I'll call you, you don't call me. Or thank you, I want to come back for another visit. So 10% of the people would be in the third category, as Wally mentioned. It also gives them some autonomy to think that maybe there are different options. Maybe it may not be this gene therapy. Maybe it's the in vivo gene therapy that's coming 5-10 years from now. Switching to the second part of the conversation, I can hardly add to Wally Smith's words, we have earned the mistrust. And we as healthcare workers, as healthcare providers, have a lot to do to have conversations with ourselves and between ourselves out of how to win back this trust. We have great difficulty recognizing that it's a situation that's crazy, not the people that are crazy. This is extremely difficult to understand. In every hospital where sickle cell patients were treated in this country, this morning, somebody was rolling up their eyes when they knew that a certain patient had been admitted to hospital again. I actually understand their frustration, and I tell them, look, gene therapy has a possibility of changing everything. And we have to let go and address and acknowledge and educate each other with all goodwill and be shorn of the prejudices that we have brought. It's not just the healthcare providers that have the prejudice, that have these preconceived notions. A lot of times the families have written off that child, that brother, their sister, who's in the hospital all the time. So as a community, sickle cell is not even in the front and center, even amongst the African American community, as an important problem. So we have a lot of work to do. So I don't want to be taking up too much of your time. I hope I addressed that question.
Thank you. We do have a question from the audience that I'm going to sort of paraphrase. There's a few related to it. And it is, what can be done to make gene therapy more accessible and more affordable? And I think related to that, what can we do overall to really move the needle here in sort of getting affordable treatments accessible to the people who need them?
Well, the federal government has done a spectacular job. The CMS has negotiated on behalf of our patients, of our states, and 33 states and DC and Puerto Rico are now part of a cell and gene therapy access model. And in my own state of Connecticut, Medicaid director said, quote, FDA has approved this treatment. Medicaid must pay. It is the law. So enormous work has been done by the federal partners. It's now up to us in the field to get the word out to people and have conversations that this treatment is now available. They have thought through everything, not just paying for the treatment, but also the coordination that it will take, the family support, child care, all kinds of things are part of this implementation project. I'm quite excited about it. We have to do our part.
Thank you. Antoine, for you, what were some of the resources that were most helpful to you as you navigated this journey to get approval for gene therapy?
Well, mainly one of them was my her primary doctor, Dr. Raj, was the outlet, big resource outlet for us. And then kind of just getting online, reading some stuff, Googling some stuff as well. And I will have to say I've been in contact with some really good hematology doctors locally, starting with our primary doctor, and then even the doctors up at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, the transplant doctor as well, and then the hematology doctor up there as well. And so then I just turned around and kind of just Googled on my own and just read up on a few things about the gene therapy, what it had, as Dr. Smith would say, you know, the risks and rewards for it as well. But yeah, just really, I'm very fortunate to have good connections with our primary doctors locally and even around town.
Great. Thank you. And as our audience can see, Dr. Kaushal has now joined us. Welcome. Dr. Smith, for you, you talked a lot about, or some about the IRB review and approval process. What are some of the unique aspects of that when you're dealing with such novel new therapies, such as these gene therapies? Are there some, do you have to, are the approaches different? How do you handle dealing with your IRB when proposing a trial of such a new therapy?
Well, imagine being a company and being told after you have given your therapy, you need to follow your patient for 15 years. And that's the current dogma for how long patients who are being given these therapies need to be followed. Why are we doing that? We're looking for post treatment effects, cancer, other long-term effects. And obviously, we're also looking for benefits, benefits on the preservation of organs, benefits on prevention of deterioration of the sickle cell disease. The way we showed that hydroxyurea really worked, was far after the clinical trial, which was a 2-year-long clinical trial. We continued following patients in a non-randomized fashion for 17 and a half years on average, trying to show the benefits as well as potential risks of the therapies. What were the concerns? The concerns were that people on hydroxyurea would get cancer, they would get leg ulcers. What were the expected benefits? We didn't know whether it would save lives or not. And so, not in a randomized fashion, but in a non-randomized fashion, we were able to show that it preserves organs and probably saves lives. And so now that's been tacked on pretty much to the whole approval process for these medications. You have to agree that you're going to follow patients for 15 years. That's unique, and certainly a huge difference for that, between that and many other therapies.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Looking at some questions from the audience here. We have a question that says, given the stigma surrounding opioid use, have you found that developing a trusting patient-provider relationship more difficult? And have more patients been inclined to consider transformative treatments as a result of increasing difficulty in obtaining medications to help them manage their day-to-day disease? Dr. Smith or Dr. Krishnamurti, any thoughts on those?
No to that second question. The difficulty obtaining pain treatment has in no way pushed people into a flood of acceptance of remittive therapies such as transplantation or gene therapies or transformative therapies. What it has done is it has pushed patients more towards non-opioid pain treatment alternatives. That is the current groundswell. If I can't get my hands on these opioids, what can I do to treat my pain? I would say, though, that, and you didn't ask this question, but I would say that the gene therapy and transplantation therapy revolution has made the remittive therapies of hydroxyurea, crizanlizumab, and L-glutamine more accessible to a number of patients. I agree with Dr. Krishnamurti. So few people hear about any of these options. And when they come in the door thinking, I want to learn about gene therapy, and then they learn, oh, well, if you don't want gene therapy, or if you don't want transplantation, we have 3 other drugs we can offer you. And they, for the first time, learn that these 3 drugs can reduce the number of vaso-occlusive crises and may prolong life. They, for the first time, start thinking, oh, I didn't realize that. I just thought these drugs were in many cases, people have this idea that they were some sort of still experimental. And we go, no, they're not experimental. They're on the market and you can get them now.
If I may, I see 2 or 3 patients each week, new patients for gene therapy consults. And I always carry a box of Kleenex because I know I'll need them as soon as I tell them you have the possibility of living a life without pain and pain medicines. There's a flood of tears when I say that, because even people who have accepted that they probably can't ever live their life without pain medicines don't actually want to be tied to pain medicines. So there are many people who are in equilibrium about pain medicines and the way their life is, good, bad, ugly, who may never come in for a consult. But I can tell you the people who are seeking a change. And even the people who are seeking a change don't actually believe that this could actually work.
So how do we address that? So what you're talking about really is a huge gap of knowledge, right, between what's available and that we know as providers or as experts in the field, and what is being, truly made available to the patients who need it, because they don't even know about it. So where's the system failure there?
We have to get in front of the people outside the clinical setting, where people control the agenda, not within the power disequilibrium of a clinic visit. We have to get out there. There's a lot of work being done using electronic media, and certainly, sickle cell patients are great consumers of electronic media, more than we think you would, than what we are producing. I think a combination of those. And also, they have to have this conversation in the hematologist's office and the primary care doctor's office and in the emergency department, not only in the transplant clinic.
Antoine, you talked a lot about your relationship with your doctor being such an important part and how much trust you have. Are there other community-based organizations, other places that you feel are trusted sources where we can help get this important information out so that more people can take advantage of these therapies?
Yeah, I sat on the board as a community outreach with the Sickle Cell Association of Kentuckiana. They actually been a part of our lives since maybe, I think Callie was like 2 years old. Um, and again, um, they've been so helpful with information, things that we didn't know that was available for us, didn't know about clinics, um, didn't really know that there was other folks that were um, going through the same things that we were going through as far as trying to treat our child. Um, I will say, and I just gonna touch base with it. We got stuck in Alabama, or my daughter tried to go to vacation in Florida. Got stuck in, went into a crisis. Had to meet her down in Birmingham, Alabama. Got stuck in the hospital there for about a week because she had a pain crisis, and I just saw what those doctors were doing, those nurses, their hospitals, what they were doing. Um, they took wonderful care of us. Got a pain under control enough for us to end up getting back on the road, heading back home, and then to turn around. That's when our doctor called us and said we need to be admitted um, because of that spleen, that issue that she was having with her spleen. I say that to say there's always room for us to grow between the doctors, the patients, the community. Um, it's so important to see, when those organizations are hosting events and just seminars or whatever, that the doctors are present, giving this information, not just when we go into your office and see you, but the fact that you're available outside of the office in the hospitals. I think that's a big step too, as far as gaining the trust in the community and you know educating the patient himself about what's available. I'm just fortunate that the relationship I've had with our doctor, but I've also talked with them, and there's so many other families that they don't feel that closely to the doctor or the doctors or the nurse practitioners or the nurses or even the hospital a lot of times. Um, so I just think, it's so much room for everybody to grow and improve in, all the way from, your doctors all the way down to the patient and to into the community as well.
Great, thanks. Dr. Kausel, for you, can you talk to us a little bit about how does the FDA review these sort of transformative therapies? Are there novel processes in thinking about the gene therapies? Can you talk a little bit about that process for us?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to join all of you. So I'm Megha Kaushal, and I'm sure based on the introduction, I'm a pediatric hematologist, and I'm the branch chief for benign hematology. And so our group supports the review and regulatory oversight of cell and gene therapies. And I was a part of both of the sickle cell gene therapy products that were approved. And so it is the clinical development plan is a long process, and we advise companies throughout that whole process, starting with the initial um, clinical trials and their development and the endpoints that we want to see in those trials. And really, in our sickle cell gene therapy trials, we really wanted an endpoint that showed clinical benefit. So for these trials, we wanted to look at, are the vaso-occlusive crises or events and the pain crises, uh, going down? Are they being completely resolved with the gene therapy products? And that was our really our very setting a high standard for that, because that's what we want to see with these type of products that we're giving. And of course, safety is paramount. So there are multiple endpoints that were related to safety in these trials. And once again, as Dr. Smith and Dr. Krishnamurthy have alluded to, we look at that safety not only just for approval, but we'll also be looking at that in long-term follow-up and getting a collection of data on all the adverse events following administration of your gene therapy, and looking at all those assessments, because that is really integral to monitor all these long-term safety events of the gene therapy products.
Great, thank you. There's a number of questions in the chat that relate to really how do people find out if they're eligible. There's several that people talking about themselves or their family members wanting to figure out, are they eligible for the gene therapy? And so I'm wondering if either Dr. Smith or Dr. Krishnamurthy or anyone can offer, perhaps we could put in the chat, where is a good resource? Because obviously if their doctor knows, that's great, but it may be that many practitioners aren't actually aware of what the criteria.
Very, very few practitioners are expert enough to answer that question, Jonathan. There's something like 40 or 50 approved centers offering these therapies in the country now, off of a clinical trial. And on a clinical trial, Dr. Krishnamurthy can tell me, but I imagine it's some small number. So a question that is bundled with the question, how do I determine if I'm eligible, is how do I go to a place that can answer the question for me? And I'd offer two sources. One's the National Alliance for Sickle Cell Centers. There's a website, NASEC, I think it's .com, is it .org? .org. And that's a relatively new organization. But then each of these companies has websites where you can find out where the qualified treatment centers are for their particular product to approve therapies, and you can go there. So chances are your doctor is not going to know this unless they are, in a center that is actually doing the therapies.
If I may add to it, with 51 centers for one product and 40 plus for the other, the centers are quite widely distributed. And if your doctor does not know about gene therapy, it behooves them to connect with somebody who does, just like they would send somebody, send you to an MRI or an endocrinologist. They need to find that. There is no excuse in this country to say my doctor doesn't know. I have a more fundamental issue with the question, am I eligible? If I were having a heart attack and if my cardiologist came and talked about cabbage, I wouldn't ask him if I'm eligible for cabbage. I would ask him, could I benefit from it? Which is why I find these words matter. And I think we have so many gatekeepers that our patients have got used to, that we need to fundamentally change the conversation about access. And that's a big topic. So I just stop it there.
Okay, we are running short, but I'm gonna try to pick two final questions. First one here for Dr. Smith. How can institutions better balance the urgency families feel for transformative therapies with the need to uphold rigorous research protections?
Well, we do have these things called institutional review boards, which are supposed to do exactly that. That is, make sure that only therapies that have been rigorously vetted for potential benefit for sickle cell patients get to the point where they can be offered to those patients. If you don't know what an institutional review board is, I think Jonathan Green is a wonderful source of information. He and his National Institutes of Health website, a wonderful source of information for telling you what this is. These boards are made up of often patients, plus doctors, plus administrators, and plus others, advising whether or not an individual therapy that's been offered for a clinical trial should be approved at the particular medical center that they're at to go on trial. Once that's done, the next huge protection is something called a consent form. And every patient must sign a consent form, or their parent must sign a consent form in order for them to go into a clinical trial. Those are two very large institutional protections. I also recommend talking to people who've been through certain therapies and getting the benefit of the coming from the horse's mouth, what their individual experiences were. Patients tend to trust patients. And if you talk to somebody who's been through a therapy, they can give you the ups and the downs. And you probably should talk to more than one, because it depends on what their outcome was. You're going to get a different opinion. But how do you get an opinion about a car mechanic? You talk to your neighbor, and what mechanic do you use? What barber do you use? This is normal human behavior. So same thing with gene therapy and with other sickle cell therapies. Try to talk to patients who've been through it before.
I'm going to push back just a little bit on that, even though I live deeply in the IRB space here. But there's a societal, there's a natural and I think necessary tension here, right? Particularly for serious life-threatening diseases for which there are not many effective therapies, to get, to really push the edge of research, get new things and get them to market. I think FDA and Dr. Kaushal, I'd be interested, feels this too. You have the fast track program. There was certainly a lot of controversy around some gene therapies for Duchenne's going on to, yes, the IRB is there to make sure that the protocol meets all the criteria for approval, but there's so many factors we have to balance along there, and which I think we all have to just recognize and be cognizant of. That's different than the individual factors that each patient has to think about as they go on this journey. I don't know, Dr. Kaushal, if you have any thoughts sort of from the FDA perspective for that tension.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think all aspects, try to put in that form of safety. You have the IRB, you have your clinician that you're talking to, all of our warriors. I mean, you have all these great patient advocate groups, that are putting out great information for the therapies that are available. And so, providers, caregivers, I mean, everybody will play into that role. And that is really the balance. All therapies have a risk, and from the regulatory standpoint, we have to balance that benefit risk assessment. That is what we look at, to approve a product. But making a decision whether to undergo a therapy, that really is patient and their caregivers and the providers, and all of the discussion that you have together to make an informed decision, and really advocate for yourselves. And I know our providers advocate for our patients as well. And so, but that is the key, just that we have an informed decision as well to make a decision-making process.
Thank you. Great. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit for this last question. Given the significant psychological implications of living with sickle cell, what research exists on the psychological aspects of undergoing gene therapies, both during and after treatment? And adding on to that, what supports do we need to be sure we provide to our patients that are considering or undergoing this therapy?
I'm happy to take that. There's quality of life that is being routinely studied, and quality of life improves depending on how bad it is, that it was before transplantation, is a short answer. So patients with sickle cell disease are doing better, but it's not all the domains, right? So you may have improved physical function, you may have improved functioning of your social roles and satisfactoriness social roles. But if you have anxiety or depression, unless you have a system in place that anxiety and depression is going to be handled, because some part of it is not going to be related to sickle cell disease. Your sickle cell related anxiety or depression might go away. But if there is other things going on in your life, other traits that you have, so in fact, when you take pain away, that vacuum can be filled by other psychological pathology. So I think you answered your question, Dr. Green. We have to have a multidisciplinary team in place who are adequately funded, and which is part of what the implementation project is to have access to CC. That's why it's such a thing of beauty, I think, that the federal government has crafted. That's what needs to be in place. And the 1 year wait time to gene therapy is a fantastic time to use to work on all of these things.
I saw some nods from Dr. Smith. Any other thoughts to add?
I really like the idea of things entering the vacuum of pain. And I'd never heard it put that way before. I'm going to steal that. Patients lose an identity when they stop being a sickle cell patient. Our experience is that that is the single biggest risk of having a transformative therapy. You actually lose an identity. I'm not a patient anymore. Now what? I mean, you're still a patient, but you know what I mean. I'm not having VLCs anymore. Now what? What do I do with myself? And this is completely unexplored. We have exactly 100 or so people on whom to study this, and we have very little information, Dr. Green.
Thank you. That was really an amazing thought of losing that identity. It hadn't really ever occurred to me there. Well, I want to just take this moment and really thank all of you for this incredible discussion, your participation in this. It's been, exceeded all my hopes and dreams. I've learned a lot here. So at this point, I will just turn over to Natalie Klein, the director of OHRP, for a final wrap up.
Hi, everybody. What a privilege to jump in here right at the last minute to say thank you for such a rich discussion. You're truly experts, and your expertise, whether that expertise is the expertise that only a patient or a caregiver can have, or a provider or an investigator, that expertise really helps us in our collective effort to pursue a trustworthy research and clinical enterprise. OHRP's mission to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of research participants is a shared mission. And I also want to thank the people that are here on the line attending, because you're part of that shared mission. I also want to let people know, just if I see questions about how you can be more involved, how providers can learn more. If we could put up that next slide. I want to encourage anybody interested to join part 2, which is hosted by our partners at HHS's Office of Minority Health. This will be another opportunity to hear from experts and to get more involved. These materials will be archived and available online. This has just been truly excellent. Many, many thanks, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.